So today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my guest, Thomas Otter, General Partner at Acadian Ventures, to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Thomas, welcome to the show. To kick things off, could you share a little bit about yourself and your journey that led you to now becoming a venture capitalist in the HR technology and future of workspace?
Yeah, thanks, David. Firstly, thanks for being on the show. I'm a regular listener and very much enjoy your podcasts and newsletters and stuff. So they're super for the industry. So cool with that. Thanks for having me on the show. So I've lurked in HR technology for all of my working career. I started as a consultant back in South Africa in the 90s, ended up working with SAP, gradually climbed the ladder up SAP, ended up at Gartner, led the HR tech research at Gartner for a while, then returned to SAP, led product at SuccessFactors, did a bit of advisory work after that, and sort of I fell into venture. Most people actually do it the other way around. They go into venture capital quite early in their career. And for me, it's sort of turned out the other way around, which is a kind of unusual path, but it's quite an interesting one because I'm now able to take the sort of experience that I've gleaned over the years and apply it now through an investing lens. So that's kind of our differentiation as a firm, in that we really understand the space in which we invest. So my partner's a guy called Jason Corsello, who's followed a similar path. Some of you may know him. He was the head of strategy at Cornerstone. And so, together we have a deep understanding of the HR tech space. I've got a bit of an academic background as well in the HR space too.
That's really good. And actually, we had Jason on the show all the way back in 2019. And I think he was just kicking off Acadian at the time. And it was quite interesting. It was at the time that we recorded every episode in person in a studio in our office in London. You know, those halcyon days before the pandemic. So you've got quite a unique kind of view on the HR tech space, because you've been an analyst, you've been a vendor, you've been an advisor, and now you're an investor. And obviously you've got the academic piece that kind of links all that together as well.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, Thomas. And you're very modest. You didn't mention your excellent work in progress Substack, which I really enjoy.
Good.
You were kind to me. I can be kind to you now. And we'll touch on some of the topics that you've posted about recently on that. I definitely recommend to regular listeners, or any listeners to the podcast, if you don't already follow Thomas's work in progress Substack, then I recommend that you do. Slightly more sober analysis, shall we say, about some of the recent M&A activity in the space, and always interesting. And if you like music, like I do, then Thomas always provides a musical recommendation at the end. You got me listening to Echo and the Bunnymen again from one of your recent posts. So
they're a goodie, aren't they?
They are very good. Yeah, they are good. So let's get on to the conversation. When you look at the space now, Thomas, do you think we're in a real transformation in HR technology, or is it more of an incremental evolution?
I don't think we're in a revolution yet. There's a lot of talk of revolution. You know, every press release is a revolution or a game change or whatever. And I have a simple definition of revolution. It involves that someone loses their head. And if we apply that definition, Louis XVI, Romanovs, etc., there's a certain amount of bloodletting and head removal in any kind of revolution. And when I last checked, the incumbents in our space are still very much the incumbents. Their share prices continue to tick up. They continue to do okay. So we haven't had any kind of wholesale revolution in HR tech yet. There are skirmishes around the edges, let's say, but we don't have a revolution yet. What we're having at the moment is that the incumbents are co-opting some of the would-be revolutionaries. Yeah? So we're seeing quite a lot of acquisition going on at a relatively small scale. These aren't big acquisitions. They aren't world-changing, game-changing acquisitions. These are really relatively minor putting in the football terminology here. These are relatively small transfer market maneuvers. These aren't changing any rules or making any massive differences in the game. Doesn't mean they're smart. They're not smart acquisitions, but we're not in a phase of revolution yet. The potential for a revolution is clearly there, but we're not in it yet.
And whilst, I mean, again, maybe putting one of your former hats on as when you were at SAP running product there, you can understand the vendors making a big noise about it and their marketing teams, maybe putting a bit of hype behind some of these acquisitions. But it seems that that's replicated in the analysts as well, and maybe they'd be doing a better service to the industry if they're a little bit more sober in their kind of analysis of some of these acquisitions. Maybe that's just my comment, and I'm not talking about any particular analysts in particular, and I know some are more sober with it.
Yeah, I would like to see a little less exuberance from the analyst from the analyst community when a vendor that's got a market capitalization of several hundred billion buys a company for $1 billion. It's not a big deal. It may seem to a big deal to some people, but it's not really a big deal. It's just sensible business as usual, and established vendors are sitting on cash piles, and one is beholden for one's investor to do something with that cash. You can either give it back to them, or you can spend it. And there are a couple of ways of spending it, and one of them is through acquisition. So I expect that we will see more and more acquisitions over the next few months. Partly what happens in these big companies is that once you fire up the acquisition machine, it's quite hard to stop it, because you then got teams of people that are incented to do acquisitions. You have an M&A department, and you have and so these things tend to have a life of their own. And I expect to see that the acquisition momentum will continue from the usual suspects, and it makes strategic sense for those companies to be doing tactical, and strategic sense for those companies to be doing acquisitions.
And I guess it's the same thing. I remember in the 2010s when there was a period when there was quite a lot of acquisitions going on. Yeah. If you're in one of these big technology firms and you see your competitors making acquisitions, then you may be more inclined to make acquisitions as well, and then it's kind of the ball keeps rolling from there, doesn't it? So
and there's subtleties in the acquisitions in terms of what purpose do they serve. In some cases, acquisitions are asset acquisition. So you're buying a piece of technology which you can then roll out, build into your products, and then other acquisitions are more revenue inclined to be revenue plays, and at different times in companies, Genesis, they'll have different acquisition strategies. Yeah.
And obviously now in your role as a venture capitalist at Acadian, obviously one of the outcomes that you're probably looking for some of the companies that you invest in is an acquisition down the line by one of the bigger firms. Maybe again, can you tell us a little bit about what's the role of a VC in the HR tech area? Because I'm guessing a lot of our listeners probably don't necessarily know. And then maybe how you found it, having been on the other side of the fence, working at a big vendor or working at an analyst, kind of, providing analysis on the space. What's different from being an investor to those two areas as well? And then a little bit about what you do and what Jason does at Acadian.
Oh, wow. That we could probably go on all day about that. But let me start by, because I didn't really understand a whole lot about venture capital until I became one. In fact, I'm still learning every day after being one for now full time 4 years or so. But basically, what venture capitalists do is they provide funding to early stage companies, right? And the way this works is we will invest in any given fund. We'll invest in roughly 30 companies, and our investors have an expectation that we will give them a good return. That otherwise they wouldn't give us the money. That's one of the things that people forget about venture capital from outside, is that the two parts of this job. The one job that you know about is investing, and the other job that we have is more regulated one, which is where we have to find the people that invest in us. And so our work involves both. Everyone has a boss at the end of the day, and our boss is our LPs, our limited partners, the people and the investors, the strategic investors that invest in our company. So for instance, in our last fund, ServiceNow is one of our anchors, and so we have to offer a return to our investors, and the way we do this is we assess hundreds of companies, literally hundreds of companies a month, and we pick one every 6 to 8 weeks or so to invest in. Right, and we do that over a period of 4 years. So it roughly ends up with that we have about 30 investments after 4 years. And what we assume is that when we go into every investment, we have the expectation or the belief, that it will do what we call return the fund. Right? And what that means is let's imagine for a moment the fund is worth we've raised 30 million. Let's assume for a moment, and we make an investment, and let's say we make an investment for $1 million. We expect that investment will 30x and return the fund, right? And our hope is that we will have from the 30 investments we do, that we'll have a couple that will do that return the fund. We'll have that return the fund moment, right? So that means we're looking for companies that will grow big, right? Because to return the fund, you have to become a sizable company. So we're not looking at funding nice companies who are solving nice little problems, who want to be reasonably successful. We want to find those companies that are going to grow really, really big. And obviously, we don't know on day one which of the 30 are going to grow big. But we have the belief that when we make those investments, that one of these 30 companies could go on and grow and grow big. So actually, acquisition by an incumbent is an okay outcome for us, but actually what we want really is we really would like our companies to grow to a point where they can be when they could, for instance, IPO. That would be the preferred outcome, but obviously a high multiple acquisition by an incumbent is also a very pleasant landing. The goal of VC is to help accelerate these next generation, give them the capital so that they can really grow and build quickly, take advantage of the technology enhancements and really accelerate their growth. But 99% of companies in the world don't need VC money. It's a very small number of companies that should take VC money. But if you look over the last 30 or 40 years, the companies that have IPO'd, many of them, a vast majority of them, owe their early funding to venture capital.
No, that's really interesting. And we'll come back to how you evaluate some of these startups a little bit late in the conversation. I want to move to AI. We've done quite well. We're 13 minutes in before we've mentioned the two letters that seem to be driving a lot of the conversation at the moment in the space. Certainly conversations we have with CHROs and heads of people analytics in our work at Insight 222, and I'm sure driving a lot of the conversation that you're having as well. The question I'm asking, and we'll lead on to a brilliant article that you published in the last week or so in a minute. Where is AI actually making a difference? I remember the 2010s, and there was lots of talk about AI in HR then. Now, our research at Insight 222 says that companies are now actually investing in AI in HR, even if it's in small numbers at the moment. Is the market potentially getting carried away with the hype?
I think there are elements of excessive hype in the short term. I think we are. I'm going to go for a little bit of a discourse for a moment, but I think that there's two thoughts in the AI world. The one thought is that we are close to something called AGI, right? And then there's another group of people who think that we're miles away from AGI. Right? And I fall into the latter. I think we're miles away from AGI. And if you look at the academic thinking, it's probably split half between we're going to reach AGI very soon and we're not going to reach AGI in a long time. My belief is we won't reach AGI in my lifetime. I believe we'll meet some measures that people set for AGI, but genuine AGI we won't reach in my lifetime. Doesn't mean to say that there isn't going to be a lot of exciting thing done. There won't be a lot of exciting stuff done with AI, but I think we need to when we overhype and we think that we anthropomorphize and we add these human qualities to AI, I don't think it does us any good. AI is it's a fantastic technology, and I think there are fantastic ways that we can deploy it in work, and I think it's already starting to have disruptions and impact on work in both positive and negative ways. But I think we need to stop glamorizing it in the way that we have been glamorizing it and personalizing it, because at the end of the day, it's not doesn't have a moral position. It's essentially a technology, and I think we have to stop this. For instance, I get very irritated when vendors name their AI products after people, especially when they have photos of relatively attractive women pretending, as AI and so on. I find this, I find it distasteful, and I don't think it moves the industry forward. I think, so I tend to not want to fund things that have, or it creates a big bar for me to want to fund something that is named after, a person. I think that's just, it's trite and it's unnecessary. But we're in a period, I think, where we're starting to see the technology have significant impact. So already we're seeing the impacts that the technology has for building software itself, right? So the AI enables software companies to build faster and better than they could before. And this means there will be more software. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is another discussion. But the dynamics of building software have changed, right? And they will continue to change more and more. So on the one hand, we see these changes in terms of how you build, software. And then as we look into HR, I think there are areas where AI is already having a significant impact. We're seeing the impact in recruitment, both on how applicants behave and how recruitment technology is evolved. We're seeing it in learning tech. There's a lot going on in learning tech. There's a lot of potential in workforce analytics, which is a space you know very, very well. There isn't yet, though, the disruption in the core fundamental processes like payroll, time and attendance, and so on. There's potential there, but it's definitely not there. Not there yet. So we're having some interesting activities in those, I call them edge areas of HR, which is probably not really fair to people who work in recruitment and people who work in learning. But in those areas, there is already a significant disruption. So, for instance, in course authoring tooling, in recruitment, in candidate matching and selection and so on, we're already seeing significant impacts of AI. But that AI is going to take all our jobs. I'm not of that school yet. I'm of the school that it's going to screw with work in ways we don't understand. But in terms of actually genuinely AI removing jobs, I'm a little bit more skeptical than most people are. What I do see is people using AI as an excuse to change hiring strategies, to do retrenchments and so on. But if you dig down to it, AI is often just a Potemkin village that's put in front of whatever else is going on in the organization. So it's very easy to go to your investors and the stock market and say, hey, we're deploying this great AI stuff, so we don't need all these people. And that makes you look super smart. Rather than saying, oh, God, we hired too many people 5 years ago and we're really not scaling in the way we expected, so we have to do a ref. That doesn't look really quite so cool as saying, hey, we're doing this fantastic AI stuff. So I'm a little bit skeptical when people say that they're doing headcount reductions based on AI, because what I'd argue at the moment is what we can do is we can remove certain tasks, right? But we're not yet in the point where we can actually remove complete jobs. So we can automate parts of a person's work, but we can't automate all of it. So it makes for, and this is I think one of the big challenges of AI, this makes for a very interesting change management conundrum for organizations. Because if you stand up one day and say, hey, we're going to slash 30% of our people once we roll out this fabulous AI stuff, and then you turn around to your employees the next day and say, hey, you need to embrace AI, you're creating a cognitive dissonance in your workforce that I think is very hard to overcome. And if there's one thing that beats AI, it's a human being that's determined to undermine AI. The human will win that argument. If you ask a human to say, what are the clever ways I can sabotage this AI project? They will figure it out, right? So I think a lot of the AI at the moment is faced with this overhype and this creation of fear, because going back to the point I made earlier about the anthropomorphization, is that we over anthropomorphize work or AI. We create these unnecessary fears amongst people that now there's this monster coming to take my job. And if we viewed it actually as, hey, this is a technology that's super interesting, that would be much better. I think also, on this, there's a fixation with I think driven in part by this anthropomorphization. Is such a hard word to say.
I'm glad you're saying it.
If you keep saying that AI is there to replace people, then what happens is you're essentially thinking in terms of cost savings. Right? So you have a business that makes like $100, and you have costs of $70, and you say, okay, we're going to deploy AI, and you can complete reducing that down from 70 to 60 to 50 to 40 to all the way down to 0. But there's still the most you can improve is by 99.999%. You can't improve any more than that because you're not improving your top line. And so what I'd like to see more of is how can we use AI to grow new markets, to grow new ideas, to do things that we were completely unable to do before, rather than simply seeing AI as, we have this current process, how can we inject AI into this current process and save money and take humans out of the process? I think that's a rather blinkered and limiting view of what AI can do. So as you can tell, I'm probably a little bit confused. I've got these two thoughts in my head about AI is overhyped. Yet we're also not genuinely taking advantage of AI, because we're not really letting our imaginations use AI in a positive way. We're using it in this way of thinking of it in terms of replacing rather than augmenting human behavior.
No, it's really, yeah. I mean, and your mention of Potemkin made me remember that you, like me, you're a big history buff as well. And if we look at previous industrial revolutions, each industrial revolution has always created more jobs than it's discarded effectively or eliminated. And I'm an optimist, and I hope that's the case this time as well.
Yeah, it's not to say that there aren't areas which are challenged at the moment. So graduate recruitment, for instance, is pretty brutal at the moment. But I do wonder how much of that is genuinely AI or how much of it is just general macro conditions and a cynical use of AI as a reason for that lack of hiring. But some of the research is pointing to impacts on particular jobs, and graduate jobs seems to be, at least in some areas of white collar consulting and so on, seems to be genuinely impacted by AI. There's an interesting economics phenomenon called the Engels pause, which is named after Frederick Engels, Marxist mate, and that looks at the impact of when you have these changes, there is a period of wage depression. So there are elements of that, when you look at the economics. But on the other hand, there are certain jobs where there's the opposite effect, where the wages are going through the roof. So there's one side of it is AI as a driver of inequality. So will we see AI driving greater inequality, or will we see AI used to drive more equality in work? I think those are big social questions that we've yet to find answers for.
Lots to pick out there. I mean, it reminded me when you were talking, Thomas, that you very much at Acadian made a kind of distinction between HR technology and work technology, because really what AI is doing is it will change the way we work, and that has implications obviously for how we approach HR, how HR partners with the business, and the technology that supports HR, of course. So it's quite it's obviously arguably an exciting time to be an HR leader, an HR professional, but it's also extremely challenging. What would your advice be to maybe chief people officers or senior HR leaders listening to help them approach AI a little bit more pragmatically and maybe trying to get beneath the hype and partner with their leaders so they can actually, HR can actually help lead this transformation rather than being a hostage to fortune?
I'd say two things. It's a great opportunity for you to catch up on the tech side in your own competence. And this is going to sound insulting to a few HR leaders, and I'm sorry if it does. It's not meant that way. But if I go back 25 years or so, when I was doing pre-sales, right, at SAP, I was the guy driving the mouse, doing the demos, right? And one of the jobs you do is that companies would come, right, they'd bring like 10 of their C-level execs over to SAP in Germany. And I used to sit through the sessions, because everyone else was doing the demo, and always HR was always the one after lunch or whatever. But when I used to watch how CFOs would interrogate SAP, right? Like, how does the product do this? How does the product do that? And the CFO was deeply, deeply, deeply invested in the impact of technology on their function and on the organization, right? And so CFOs got tech smart, right? And so too did marketing leaders. They also got tech smart, right? They could when tools like Marketo and whatever came about, they embraced them, and the leaders of those companies embraced them and became tech savvy. And you have an opportunity, HR leaders, because the playing field is now level. Like, the CFO doesn't know very much about AI either, right? So you have a chance now to actually learn something when you're at the same starting level, right? So I'd say, go and learn something about AI. Learn what it is. Learn what supervised learning is. Learn what unsupervised learning is. Understand what a decision tree is. Understand the advantages and disadvantages of an LLM. The difference between probabilistic and deterministic AI. You don't need a PhD in maths to do this. I nearly failed maths at school, and I hadn't touched it in 30 years, and I've learned about AI. So it can be done. And put the time aside to actually learn a little bit about the technology. I'm not asking you to become AI gurus, but I'm asking you to be able to have a coherent conversation with your IT leaders about AI. And if you can do that, you'll be in a really strong point to help shape that discussion, because essentially there's two sides to the equation. There is human work, right? And there is AI work, right? And these two are going to collide, right? And if you're going to be the people that shape work, well, then you need to understand both of those dimensions. And the criticism of IT is that they don't understand the human angle, right? But the criticism of HR would be they would not understand the IT angle. So I think if you can have a understanding of the tech, you don't have to be programming it, but you need to be using it. You need to be experimenting with it. You need to be using it in your own personal life. And then also you need to be learning a little bit about the fundamentals, so you can have that discussion with IT, about things like, well, what about bias in recruitment tech? How are we minimizing that? Understand the weaknesses of generative AI, because there are many weaknesses of generative AI as a technology, and be able to participate in that, in that discussion, because that will enable you then to have the discussion about the impact of AI on work, right? And the impact of AI on headcount. Will we need to hire? Will we need to reskill? Will we need to downsize? Will we need to upsize? All those questions revolve a little bit about, how the dynamics of AI progress. So we're at the point, I think, and this is where it comes back to the question of revolution, is that 100 and something years ago, the likes of Frederick Taylor and a bunch of other clever people, the folks at DuPont and whatever, Ford and so on, they came up with the production line, right? And the production line really rethink how we made physical things, and it's reverberated through corporations ever since, right? And pretty much everything we do today mirrors or has some strong lineage back to that work that was done now. And I'd argue where we're not there yet, but that we are at the point where we can think about rethinking knowledge work in the same way that we rethought or the same level of disruption that we rethought we rethought manufacturing. And if we're coming to that point, then the challenge for HR is: are you a bystander in that process, or are you stepping up and being a player in shaping that process? And I don't think it's HR or IT. I don't think it's finance or IT. But I think it will vary by organizations. But I'd ask, HR leadership, you have the opportunity now to really shape this discussion within your organization and set the path to succeed, especially in this hybrid world where we don't quite know the extent to which we can automate. Right? It's going to require a lot of subtlety, and it's going to require a lot of negotiation, and it's going to require a lot of buy-in from employees who may be feeling threatened and so on. So I think HR has a tremendous opportunity to scale up here and become a major player. But IT and finance and other functions, if you go to their conferences, they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying, we should be leading, we need to be leading the AI charge. But that's, to answer your question a long way, I'd say, go and learn something about this. If you go into a board meeting and could talk coherently about AI, you're going to be smarter than a lot of your HR peers. And funny enough, you're going to be a lot smarter than some of the other peers that you have at the board as well.
Which is a good place to be. We've got to stop talking about leading and lead, I guess, as a function. And it's interesting listening to you, Thomas, some of the advice you're giving to HR leaders to go and learn AI and get familiar with it, get comfortable with it. We've got a hypothesis at Insight 222 that a lot of people analytics leaders are going to emerge as maybe the next generation of chief people officers. And we're seeing from the research that we're doing that a lot of people analytics leaders, maybe not surprisingly, are being asked to lead AI strategy for HR. So, and obviously these are people who do have those skills that you talked about. They do understand.
The challenge is sometimes a communication challenge. It's how do you take, how to take the fact that you understand that you understand XGBoost, and how do you turn that into something that's meaningful for a line manager, especially for a line manager, or your HR peer. So, interesting times for sure.
It is interesting time. So we're going to move a little bit. We're going to come back to an article you wrote about work slop a little bit later. Do remind me if I forget, please. So at Acadian, when you evaluate HR tech startups for potential investment, what are the kinds of innovations or approaches that are making you sit up and take notice?
Interestingly, it's normally the people, because we're investing at a stage where there isn't that much product yet. So we're really investing in the founders, and the way that they're thinking about the market. So it could be, a couple of all my portfolio companies are my favorites. But if I think about a couple, for instance, Charlie Franklin at Compa, and they do compensation. They do a lot of AI stuff in compensation. Companies really going gangbusters. What we found about him is he was a former comp leader himself, and then he got the startup itch, and that was super interesting for us because we had this. One of the things we sometimes look for in founders is you have deep functional knowledge of a problem, and then you have a burning desire to solve that problem. That's super exciting for us, and we felt like enterprise compensation was an area where there's a lot of spreadsheets, there's a lot of opportunity to rethink how compensation is done, and we had a very clear view of how they could disrupt the compensation space, and I think that they're well on the path. You're well on the path to doing that. Sometimes you meet three super smart people who are just straight out of university, which would be TechWolf. Example would be TechWolf, where so there's no like cookie cutter for the founder, but it's really is about for us it's about the desire of the founder to be successful, because we can't necessarily predict where the technology is going to go, But we look for a couple of things. So, is there somebody creating a new category? Okay. So this is like a whole new area. So if you think back like 10, 15 years ago, people like Peakon, they created the category of employee listening. It wasn't really a category before. They created a new category of tech, and those companies grew for a few years, and they were then eventually acquired by very, very successfully by Workday. But that created a new category. And so, for instance, some of the stuff going in frontline work at the moment, you could argue that's a new category. Okay. Another thing could be where you have a product that augments existing technology. So, for instance, somebody might do candidate relationship management on top of an ATS. Right, that's an example of a product that augments the existing world, but doesn't necessarily disrupt it. It sits comfortably with the existing tech stack. And then you might have something that is disruptive, which looks to replace elements of the incumbent stack. Right, so we see those three buckets, if you like, of changes in HR tech. So is it something that creates a whole new category where we didn't have a market before? Is it something that augments existing environments, or is it something that is fundamentally replacing an existing play? So something like TechWall, for instance, is it's got a little bit of both, in the sense that on one hand, the skill stuff is on one hand a new category, but not completely a new category. But it also augments. It doesn't seek to replace your Workday; it augments your Workday or your success factors. So we kind of think in terms of these ecosystems, and we look a lot for what could the synergies be between what they're trying to build and the existing landscape, because we understand that existing landscape very well.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously, when you've got transformation going on like it is at the moment, new technology firms are emerging all the time. You're saying you're literally evaluating hundreds and picking one every sort of 6 to 8 weeks to invest in, and you've got 13 kind of investments ongoing as part of a fund at any time. It must be hard sometimes to pick I suppose it's the same in anything, in any investment, to try and pick the winners from the ones that are going to maybe not grow that much versus the ones that maybe are going to fail. Obviously you're not going to share your secrets on the podcast, but you obviously have a methodology for doing that, I guess.
The thing is, we're not, we don't have perfect judgment in these things. We make plenty of blunders, and we back the wrong horse. Sometimes we back the wrong horse in the right space, and sometimes we back the wrong space. If we were, if all 30 companies did okay, that would tell me that we aren't taking enough risk. I don't want any single company to fail, but when we look back at the portfolio performance, we have an expectation that there will be a good portion of the companies in the portfolio that have failed. They've either failed completely, or they've just returned a miserly amount of capital. That's the nature. Because otherwise you're not experimenting, right? An experiment has to involve an element of risk. And, if someone says all the experiments they've done in their company have been a success, well, I'd argue that they haven't been experimenting then.
No, very good. With AI changing how work is done, how should organizations think differently about preparing their employees for the future? That might link on quite nicely with, the TechWolf investment, for example.
I'd argue that you need to have an understanding of what your employees know. Right? And most organizations don't have a clue what their employees know. So, understanding what your employees know, of course you can ask them, but, employees are kind of tired of that. I've been working here for 20 years and you still don't know what I can do. So the concept of TechWolf, without sort of trying to pitch them, is that they're able to infer, they're able to use quite clever AI to actually infer from your current work what your skills are. So they can look at if you're a programmer, they can look at what you contributed on GitHub. If you're a medical researcher, they can look at your patent filings or your other medical research, and they can derive, from your work, with your consent, what you actually know. And if you've been running a team for 10 years, we can derive from that you're a manager, right? we don't have to ask you, do you know how to manage a team? If you've been writing emails coherently in French, we can assume that you speak French. And we shouldn't have to ask you, do you speak French? So you're able to derive a certain amount of, quite a lot of information from just analyzing analyzing what you are. And then if you have, like TechWolf have done, analyzed, billions of jobs, literally billions of jobs, you're able to make quite a lot of predictions about where the job market is going and jobs are changing. So the combination of these two dimensions starts to provide quite a lot of insight for the individual, but also insight for the organization in terms of the direction and the requirements for change in the organization. So I think it's very good to have an analytical basis for thinking about change, and understanding where your organization is likely to be impacted by AI. I think is a very good starting point. So the product that TechWolf has just released helps you with that workforce intelligence product, helps you, I think get to some of that.
And I guess a product like TechWolf, and there are others out there as well, a product that helps you solve big business challenges you've got, so understanding the skills you've got, the skills you need, the gaps, and the best way to close it. That's great, because everyone needs to be good at workforce planning, particularly at the moment. And then something that potentially benefits employees as well by helping, by using that data and those insights to help recommend career pathing, learning, potential paths and compensation that could go with that. I mean, this is where AI is good for the business, good for the organization, and it's good for the employees as well. And that's really where we want to be with this, I guess. Thomas, it's a bit of a slight detour now, because I did read this last week, but I read it again this morning because we were actually in the waiting room for a while, weren't we, waiting to start the podcast. But use any time you get to your advantage is what I always say. And you wrote, as again, another plug for your work in progress Substack, you wrote something recently about an article that was published in HBR around AI generated work slot, which I must admit I read as well, enjoyed, because it like you said it did with you. It kind of resonated with your own confirmation bias. You're reading a lot of stuff at the moment, and some of it maybe isn't that good. And you, after you've read it, you think, oh God, that's 10 minutes of my life I'll never get back. But I think what you unpick there is, as well as something about the quality of maybe some of the articles that are on HBR now, you pick something about research, because I think this is an area where it is a challenge, because we all read these very well written articles, and it is a very well written article, and everything in it as well. No criticism necessary of the people that wrote the article, but the research is a little bit wonky, shall we say? And you actually got some comments. I don't know if you want to tell the story, because I think it's a great story, I think, which might resonate with some of our listeners that have maybe seen the HBR article but not read your one.
Yeah, so I read the HBR article, and this concept of work slot, the idea that AI generated work that looks brilliant, but actually when you dig into it, it's actually not very good. And we've seen that, we've all experienced that anecdotally, where we've spent some time reading something, and then we realized afterwards that we're not quite sure, does this actually really stand up? And this author was saying, this is a problem in organizations, because what it does is it undermines trust with the person that sent it to you. It's a productivity destroyer, and it's quite a refreshing anecdote to the sort of AI is awesome school. To say actually there are problems with AI generated content in that AI doesn't help us read faster. It just helps us to make things faster. So there's this imbalance. Also, the way I describe it is that there's kind of a heuristic challenge, because we used to dismiss poor work by like spelling mistakes, or not nicely formatted, or we say, okay, well, this is sloppy work. The person hasn't put much effort into it. But when we receive something that's beautiful slides with what seems well thought through, we give it immediate respect, and that heuristic is broken now. So this sounds pretty realistic, right? The challenge I had was that the researchers that did the research, it was essentially vendor-driven research with a bit of academic backing. is that they made some assumptions in the research that weren't very robust. And I didn't realize that when I first read it. And then, some guy that I know, who's a professor at another business school, had a look at it and said, well, hang on a minute, there's some problems with the actual research. And so I dug a bit deeper, and, I found a couple of things were wrong with it. And, you guys have done surveys and stuff. So an example would be that they were calling within the paper for more contributions to the research. So they were describing the output of the paper, so of the survey so far. So let's say 1,000 people had answered the survey, but then within the research note itself, they were calling for more people to answer the research. So that's the research equivalent. I would call it of leading the witness, right? You've read this report, sounds like it makes sense. Okay, let me ask you the same questions that I asked the people. That it's not academically robust. And this is a problem that we have with a lot of what I think that you need to take as a listener is, when you see something that's published by a leading consulting firm or by a, and it's got, a little semblance of academic rigor to it by, Professor ABC participator or whatever, you've got to actually take a step back and understand the, purpose of why the vendor did that research, and assess it for its research validity. And you'll find often a lot of the stuff it's a white paper, so it's a well thought through opinion, and you may well agree with the opinion, but they're often not really based in deep analytics, because no vendor is going to publish something that undermines their position. A large consulting firm is not going to publish something that says you need to stop doing A, B, and C, which you're spending 30% which is driving 30% of our revenues. So, and the same when you listen to people like me as an investor, I'm going to be telling you startup ABC is great because I have an interest in telling you the startup ABC is great. And I just think just to be a little bit more critical and don't. AI demands from us greater levels of critical thinking, not lower levels of critical thinking. So just step up your critical thinking whenever you read any research about AI and understand where it's coming from.
One of the things I loved about one of the more academics that commented on the article was that there's probably lots of work slop anyway. And just with AI, we can generate it faster. So there's an argument that's actually helping us be more productive. I quite like that one. That was
yes. There's the cynical angle. Like whose productivity are we dealing with here? The producer or the consumer? And if you're measuring product, and this is again the thing, productivity is so hard to measure. And sometimes with these articles, actually, it's not the people who write the article; it's the people who come up with the headline.
Yes, yes.
They're looking for a smart headline, and AI destroys productivity is a great headline. But proving it is a different story.
It's much harder. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you're trying to get people to get eyes on the article, aren't you? So that's why headline makers come up with what they do. I mean, I always remember my favourite headline from I can't remember if it was the 80s or the 90s. I'm showing my age now. Freddie Starr ate my hamster.
Oh yes,
which was a headline in the Sun newspaper in the UK. So yeah, very good. Right, couple more questions, Thomas. So I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball now. If you look at the next 5 years, and don't worry, I won't hold you to it. What are the trends or technologies in HR or work technology that you are most excited about, and why?
Okay, so I'll pick out a couple of things. I think we'll start doing a lot better job at recruiting. I think we have the opportunity, if it's done right, to not only deal with some of the elements of AI bias that we see, but also deliver, help solve for human bias. I think we can make tremendous breakthroughs in the area in recruitment. We can do a faster, better job of finding and matching people to work. There's a lot that is broken in the recruitment process. Don't like saying processes are broken, but there's a lot can be fixed in recruitment, and some of that I think is relatively low. Some of that is relatively low hanging fruit, given the state of where we are with technologies. I think at the time, I think we can do a lot better job in the areas around learning, how we teach people, how we prepare people for work, both before they start work and engage them in the work process. We have, just to plug another portfolio company there, we have an investment company called Arist. And what I look at what they're able to do in terms of creating meaningful learning product very, very quickly. The future of learning, I think, is bright. There's lots of challenging learning, but I think there's areas where we can make big breakthroughs in the next couple of years. And then a couple of other areas which I'm interested in is where we can do things with AI that we couldn't do before, right? And so one example that I'll talk about now is a company we have in a portfolio called Origin Benefits, right? And I want to imagine for a moment that you're head of benefits for a large multinational company with, say, 150,000 employees, in 80 countries. You've probably got 30 or 40 benefits policies per country, right? And you have no idea what's going on, right? What you're paying for them? Are they competitive? Are they providing good value for your employees? Are they what commissions are you paying on them? You have no idea, right? It's all buried in documents and whatever. And what Origin does is it soaks up all your policies that you have globally in benefits, compares them against a really robust, well thought through a database of good policies, and tells you how you stand. And if you think about what that does, to do that, it would have been impossible to do that as humans, right? It would just been too much work to do that. You wouldn't have said, okay, I want to consolidate all my global policies into a single searchable, understandable database in a single language. You would just not know how to do that. It would just been impossible. So there will be this is a long way around of saying there'll be a whole lot of things in HR tech that will seem simple in 5 years' time that feel impossible today. And those are the ones that I'm most excited about. So in a sense, I'm not answering your question, because there will be a chunk of things that we'll be doing in 5 years from now that are completely impossible today. And there will be a bunch of things that we do today that we will be doing significantly better, right? So we will bring down the time to hire has not moved, no matter what brochures you read, what are success stories you read. The time to hire has not significantly moved in 40 years. I'd like to think that in 5 years' time we've moved that. Right. But I'm more excited about the things that I don't know are coming.
I think what you showed with that tool, Origin, I think you mentioned it was, that helps a company consolidate all its benefit policies across all the countries that they're operating in, which you said would be impossible otherwise. I mean, it's not the most to me, it's not the most exciting idea, but hell, it does not provide a lot of value. And I think it's a bit, I remember someone saying it's not always the most sophisticated analytics that gets you the biggest business benefit. It could be that it's not even the most sophisticated or ingenious solution that gets you the biggest benefit, but this is one that would get you a huge benefit.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about 30% of your HR costs are benefits, right?
If you can reduce that,
and you just do not have those under control. You just do not know globally what the hell is going on, because you outsourced your HR in France, and so they're running the shared service center, and one company that they spoke to, they had a policy that was set for 2,000 employees. And basically, it was on the company's responsibility to say when the headcount changed, so that they could reduce the policy, right? And the policy has been running for 10 years. They're now at 20 employees in that country, and they've been paying for years for several thousand employees. And those kind of cost saving opportunities are massive. Yet it requires sophisticated technology to do the analysis correctly and to expose that. So it doesn't take sense of a form of analytics, but it's combines various AI techniques together with a certain amount of Gen AI to do that. But when you think about those, and that came from two guys who had originally founded Thomson and Darwin Benefits, right? So they understood the benefit space and understood the business problem, and then applying new technology to solve that problem. It's kind of cool. And I think we'll see more exciting things. Other things that get better is like integrations, connecting systems, that becomes much simpler. The technologies to rethink how you do technical integrations. So on the one hand, there's always this tension in HR tech between suites and niche vendors. And what I think will happen, what's already starting to happen, is that integrations become easier. So it enables you to have more niche vendors if you want. At the same time, the suite vendors will be acquiring those niche vendors, so it's all balancing it. I think UIs will change dramatically. So we'll see. We've essentially still in the mouse. We're still in the mouse keyboard paradigm. That's still the dominant paradigm, and I think the opportunities for that to change. I think we'll have much more communication with these applications. But one thing for HR leaders to remember is that this is something I find it a little bit ironic. I find it fascinating and ironic at the same time. Is that HR is often the crucible of enterprise innovation in tech. So the first payroll was 1951, right? And that was the first business application. Right, the very first business application to run a computer did some invoicing stuff and a couple of things. It was at Lions Tea Room in the UK. So the business applications market actually started. The software market actually started in the UK. Right, the first use of the internet for a commercial purpose that other than porn was recruitment. Right, and HR blew up the newspaper. Right. Changed the newspaper industry dramatically with that, and that was the first use of the browser behind the firewall was employee self-service. Right, cloud adoption in HR is far higher than in almost any other other function, and I'm arguing it'll be the same with AI. When we look back at AI in 5 years' time, there'll be more AI deployed in HR than there will be in finance or CRM.
So, Thomas, let's get to the question of series, and then I've got one last question afterwards as well. So, This is a question we're asking everyone on this series of the podcast. We've touched on it a little bit, so you might summarize stuff that you've said as well, and that's fine. How can HR lead the shift to skills-powered workforce planning?
Well, firstly, you should buy TechWolf, obviously, but we're putting that aside for a moment. I think we need to understand why skills are become important is that and the way I describe it is if I remember going to a conference about 20 years ago, and I stood up and I held up a bolt, right? And there was a bunch of engineers in the room, right? And I held up a bolt like this, I said, okay, hey, here's a bolt, and tell me what this is, right? And they said, and I passed it on to people in the front row, and they said, it's a left-threaded, 14 centimeter bolt and it's built with XYZ steel, 17.4 quality steel or whatever, and they told me, and it's got a hexadot, told me what the nut was on the top, and within a few minutes we completely described this bolt. And I said, what does it cost? And they could tell me, okay, what the landed cost was and what the whatever cost. And I said, okay, so this bolt costs you less than a cent, right? And you can describe it perfectly, yet you can't describe your colleague who's costing you 150,000 euros a year, right? And so, like, part of me says, what's taken so long, HR? The currency of understanding your workforce is the skills that they have, right? And you should be ashamed that you don't know what your people know. So you spend all this money, all these years on HR technology. You say you're the partner of the business, but if you don't know what the business needs, right, and you don't know what the skills your people have, what are you doing? Right? Like, get on with it. Figure out what your organization requires, right? In terms of the currency, the best currency we have. It's not perfect, but the best currency we have, or the best mechanism we have to do that measurement is skills, right? So I don't know why you're debating this. I kind of, I went back, go back like way back when the US, I think it was the US Navy came out with the Army came out with the kind of competency models, and before the Second World War, and they mapped out how their workers got the technology The technology is there today, whether it's TechWolf's technology, whether it's anybody else's technology, to actually understand what your people can do, right? And you understand what they want to do, what they can do, and understand what your organization requires of them both today and in the future, and just get on with it. You have the opportunity to use reliable data to massively impact the success of your business, and I'm puzzled about why it's taken so long, and why it has been, what's the word? There's been a lot of sort of hype and whatever about it, but to me it just seems like so basic, obvious business requirement to know what your people know. And there are technologies today to help you understand what your people know and understand what your organization requires. And I don't understand why this wasn't solved decades ago. But today I've got even more impatience because the technology to solve this is there. And what I'd say is that what the failings, if I think of what it's failed, is too many of the skills projects that organizations have done in the past have been for HR's sake. Right? They haven't taken them and put them into a context that is useful to the line manager or useful to the executive. Right? It's been an HR project for HR's sake, and HR's patted itself on the back when it's done the project. And I think the piece that misses, like, how do we take this and move it into the business, right? And HR exists. I'm a big believer that HR exists to make the business better, right? And it's not necessarily short term, every day make the business better, but it's a long term thing that HR is there to help drive the long term sustainability of the business, right? And so the dialogue that's been missing to date has been the dialogue back with the rest of the. I think it's an executive failure where there hasn't been the dialogue with the other executive as why this is important, and that I think needs to change. So if I have one request for the leadership of HR is go into a board meeting and fire up some of your HR technology and demo it, right? Because the CFO goes into the board meeting and fires up Excel, right? And shows the latest budget, shows the latest whatever. I dare you to go into a board meeting, fire up one of your HR solutions and actually show your fellow board members live information about the workforce and bring the workforce to life into that context. HR technology should not be something that is 15 layers down in the organization. It's something that should be in the kit bag and in the tool in the weaponry of a CHRO. And so use these technologies to make your point in the boardroom, and then things will change.
Very good, Thomas. Great advice, and I would urge those listening who can go into the boardroom to do that. Last question, Thomas. Yep. This one's for a friend, shall we say? If someone is currently an HR practitioner, an analyst, works for a technology firm or a consultant, and they want to explore moving into become a venture capitalist, what advice would you give them?
Hey, if you're serious about it, give me a call. I'd love to talk through about it. I think I'd say the financial part of it is actually not as difficult as you think it might be. The jargon and whatever. There is a jargon, there is a code in finance that you need to learn. It'll take you a couple of years to get the hang of it, but that shouldn't put you off. If you don't have a finance background, it shouldn't put you off. You can build one. You can go on courses and you can learn enough about finance. But what you have to remember is that your job is investing, right? And that's the change, is that you're becoming. And I'd say that if you want to become a venture capital, what it means is you're becoming an investor, right? And your goals are to provide a return to the people that are trusting you with their money. So you creates a big responsibility. So the fiduciary, I have a big fiduciary duty, both legally and personally, to the people who've trusted us with their money. Right. And so it seems glamorous on the outside, whatever, and it is a very cool, glamorous job, no doubt about that. But you are at the end of the day responsible for other people's money, and so it can't be a part-time thing. You can't say, oh, I want to dabble. There are roles where you can dabble, so you can do advisory work with portfolio companies. You can be a scout. There's various ways you can dabble in venture capital. But if you want to do it, if you want to really be an investor, then you have to commit to it. You have to commit to it, full time. And it's not it's a job that takes, more than 6 hours a day. It's you're busy, and you don't determine when you're busy. It's when you find an opportunity or whatever, then that you might be busy free one day, and then the next day you're working 20 hours. So you just never know. But I'd say that if you're curious about the future of the space and you want to have massive influence on where HR tech goes, then do get in touch. I'd love to discuss it further.
Great. Well, you heard that there. For those listening, that maybe Thomas has piqued your interest a bit. Maybe you'll see Thomas at Unleash in a couple of weeks' time. From the recording,
I will be at that.
But
I will be at that.
Actually, we Unleash should have finished by the time we record. So at a future event,
okay. You would have seen me.
You would have seen you at Unleash. So Thomas, thanks so much for being a guest on the show. We've been talking about doing this for a while, so I'm glad we've managed to do it.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Can you share with listeners how they can follow the work you're doing at Acadian, and also how they can read your musings on the work in progress?
Yeah. So. I'm on Substack. So if you just look up Thomas Otter on Substack, you'll find me. We have a website called Acadian Ventures. So www.acadianventures.com. The legacy of Acadian is that it's actually the name of a national park in the US where Jason used to hang out. So that's where we got the name from. It's also so it ends up first on the lists of things, which is a smart thing to do. But if you just stick me into, you stick Thomas Otter into Google, and normally I pop up. There's a professor in Frankfurt called Thomas Otter. That's not me. Look me up. You'll find me on the interwebs.
That's great. Thomas, thanks so much. And thanks as well for reintroducing me to Erko and the Bunnymen. Thank you.
Pleasure.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice, and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.